The enemy is not attacking this generation randomly. He has austerity. And today, I want to share a testimony of a pastor who died and was shown the plans of the enemy to make sure this generation is destroyed. If you are watching this video, it means God wants you to see this. Stay with me to the end, because what I'm about to share with you will change your narrative about life. Before I continue, I would want to know where you are listening from in the comment section. That way we can get to connect as one family. Also share your thought about this testimony so that others will learn from your ideas and suggestions. Now let's jump right into today's testimony. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am a pastor. I have served in ministry for 11 years, and I want to tell you something that happened to me on a Thursday night in February that I have never been able to fully explain with words, though I have tried many times since. What I am about to share is not a dream. It was not a vision in the way most people use that word. I left my body. I was somewhere else, and what I saw changed everything about the way I pray, the way I preach, and the way I understand the hour we are living in. I had been going through a particularly difficult season in my church. We were a small congregation, about 200 members, mostly working families, a handful of college students, and a growing youth group that my wife and I had been pouring ourselves into for 3 years. But something felt wrong in the atmosphere. I could not name it exactly. Kids who had been on fire for God were going cold. A young man I personally discipled for 2 years stopped coming to church, and nobody knew why. 3 of our teenage girls had been hospitalized for anxiety and depression within the same month. A college student who used to lead worship told me quietly one Sunday that he no longer believed in anything. I was troubled in a way that went beyond pastoral concern. It felt spiritual. It felt urgent. And so that Thursday night, after my wife had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I went to my study, got on my knees beside my desk, and I began to pray. I prayed for about an hour, maybe a little more. I remember the clock on the wall reading 11:40 when I started. And I remember feeling a deep heaviness in my chest that was not physical. It was the kind of weight you feel when you know something serious is happening in the invisible world, and you are pressing into it with everything you have. I was not praying pretty prayers. I was groaning. I was calling out names. I was weeping over teenagers I knew, and teenagers I had never met. I remember saying out loud, "God, what is happening to this generation? What is the enemy doing? Show me what I cannot see." Then everything stopped. I do not know how else to describe it except to say that I felt myself lift. There was no pain. There was no fear in that first moment. It was like a thread being pulled gently upward. And then I was standing, or hovering, I'm not sure which, and I looked down and saw my own body still kneeling on the floor beside my desk. My hands were still folded. My face was still pressed forward. I watched myself for a moment with a strange calm, the way you might watch someone sleeping, and I understood without anyone telling me that I was not dead, that I had simply been permitted to go somewhere. Then the room disappeared. What I entered next was not heaven, at least not the heaven I will one day live in. It was a realm between the seen and the unseen, a kind of elevated vantage point from which the whole earth was visible below me, and above me there was a vast luminous sky that was not quite sky. The light in that place came from everywhere at once and from nowhere I could identify. It was warm and deliberate the way sunlight feels when it breaks through after a long winter, but multiplied 100 times over. The air, if I can call it that, was not air. It was something I breathed in and felt immediately in the deepest part of who I am. Every breath was clarity. Every breath was peace. But then I looked down. What I saw below me stretched across the earth like a map, except it was alive. I could see cities. I could see continents. I could see schools and bedrooms and street corners and university dormitories and apartment buildings in places I had never visited. And over all of it, moving through it like a dark weather system that covered the ground without touching the sky, was something I can only call shadow. But shadow is too simple a word. This was an intelligent darkness. It moved with purpose. It gathered in specific places. It targeted specific people. And I saw them. I saw beings that I knew immediately were demonic. They were not the theatrical monsters of horror films. They were something far more disturbing because of how calculated they were. Some of them were barely visible, almost translucent, and they moved through walls and into rooms where young people were alone. I watched one settle beside a teenage boy sitting in the blue glow of a screen at 2 in the morning. The boy had headphones on. He was watching something, and the being beside him was whispering, not into his ears but into the space around his mind, and I understood what it was saying without hearing the words. It was saying you are nothing. It was saying no one would notice if you disappeared. It was saying this feeling will never end. I saw another cluster of these beings gathered over a college campus. They were passing something between them, a substance that looked like smoke, but behaved like a living thing, and they were releasing it downward into the atmosphere of the place, and I watched it settle over students like a fog. The students below could not see it. They were laughing, some of them. They were walking to class, but the fog was already working, and I understood that what I was watching was the slow cultivation of addiction, not only to substances, but to numbness itself, to the particular kind of numbness that comes when a person has been slowly convinced that nothing is sacred, nothing is permanent, and nothing is worth suffering for. I saw deception moving like a current through social platforms and through media, being guided by beings who understood exactly what they were distributing and why. There was nothing random about it. It was targeted. It was generational. These forces were not simply causing chaos. They were trying to accomplish something very specific, and the more I watched, the more I understood what it was. They were trying to cut off a generation before it could arrive at its purpose. I felt a presence beside me before I turned to look. It was not frightening. It was the opposite of frightening. It was the most grounded, settled, authoritative feeling I've ever experienced in my life. The feeling of standing next to someone who is completely unafraid of everything you're afraid of, and whose calm is not indifference but absolute certainty. When I turned, I saw him, and I knew immediately who it was. I am not going to spend many words on his appearance, because I find that whenever I try to describe it, I either say too much or too little, and both feel dishonest. What I will say is that the light I mentioned earlier, the light that came from everywhere, most of it was coming from him, and his eyes, when they met mine, did something to the inside of my chest that I still feel even now when I think about it. It was as though every question I had ever been afraid to ask was already answered. He said, "Watch what happens when they pray." And then I saw the other side of what was happening on the earth. Scattered across the dark map below, in the same cities and nations where the shadow was moving, there were points of light. Small at first. Some of them were single lights, one person in one room, on their knees in the dark. Some were clusters. A small group gathered in a living room. A few people in the back of a church nobody had ever heard of. A woman in a hospital corridor praying with her head against the wall. As I watched, the light from each of these people began to rise. It did not drift upward the way smoke drifts. It shot upward. It was purposeful and fast, and the moment it entered the spiritual atmosphere above the earth, it changed form. What had been simple light became something else. I watched and I understood. I was seeing the prayers of believers becoming weapons and warriors in the unseen realm. The angels were unlike anything I had imagined. They were enormous. They moved with a speed that made everything else look slow. And they were not gentle in the way that word is often misused. They were gentle with the people they were assigned to protect. Deeply gentle, the kind of gentleness that costs something. But in battle they were ferocious and precise and completely without hesitation. I watched them move against the dark forces with an authority that made the darkness retreat. Not always all at once, but it retreated. Every prayer that rose from the earth below gave them something. I did not fully understand the mechanics of it, but it was clear that the prayers were not just communication. They were fuel. They were permission. They were the thing that opened the door for intervention. I saw a teenager in what looked like a South American city, sitting on the edge of a bridge, and I wanted to scream because I understood what she was considering. But I watched a single woman 2 miles away drop to her knees in a kitchen, and a light went up from that woman so fast it was like a flare, and an angel was there on that bridge within a moment, not visible to the girl, but present, and the wind changed, and something in the atmosphere shifted, and the girl stood up slowly and walked back to the sidewalk and sat down against a wall and wept. and somewhere 2 miles away, a woman was still praying, not knowing what she had just participated in. I wept too. Then he spoke to me again, and this time there was more weight in what he said, and he said it with the kind of love that does not soften the seriousness of the thing being said. He told me that what I was seeing was not symbolic. He told me that the generation I was watching, the teenagers and young adults across the earth, contained within them something the enemy understood very well and was desperate to prevent. He told me that revival was coming, not the small revivals that the church had seen before, significant as those were, but something the earth had not yet witnessed, a movement of the gospel that would reach into every language and every culture in every corner of the world, and that this generation was the carrier of it. They were being prepared for a kind of mission that previous generations had laid the foundation for but would not complete themselves. He told me that this was why the attack was so severe. The enemy was not attacking randomly. He was attacking specifically. He understood the assignment of this generation better than most of the church did, and he was working methodically to destroy them before they could step into it. Addiction, deception, hopelessness, identity confusion, isolation, the erosion of belief in truth itself. These were not cultural accidents. They were strategic. They were warfare. And the church, he said, had in many places not yet recognized what hour they were standing in. Then he said something I have thought about every day since. He said the intercessors are the key. He said the men and women and young people who were rising to pray, many of them unrecognized, many of them praying in obscurity with no audience and no platform, were the ones holding the line. Their prayers were not falling on deaf ears. Their prayers were being answered in ways they would not fully see until eternity, and they were the reason more of this generation was still standing than the enemy had planned for. He said, go back and tell the church to wake up. Tell them it is not too late. Tell them that what they do in prayer in this season will determine what this generation is able to do in the earth in the next one. There was a moment after he spoke where I simply stood in the light and could not move. Not from fear, from the weight of being trusted with something. I have been in ministry for over a decade, and I have never once felt the weight of an assignment the way I felt it in that moment. It was not a burden that crushed. It was the kind of weight that demands that you stand up straighter. Then I was back. I was on the floor of my study. My face was against the carpet. My hands were still folded in front of me. The clock on the wall read 12:53. I had been on my knees for just over an hour. My body felt like it had run a long distance. My face was wet, and I do not know when I had started crying. I lay there for a long time before I could get up. Not because I was unable to, but because I did not want to leave the holiness of what I had just come back from. When I finally stood and sat in my chair, I opened my Bible to no particular place, and it fell open to Joel, and my eyes went immediately to the passage about God pouring out his Spirit on all flesh, and sons and daughters prophesying, and young men seeing visions. And I put my face in my hands and I wept again, not from sadness, but from the specific grief of having been shown something magnificent and urgent, and knowing that most of the people I would tell it to would not yet understand the hour. I want to say something to every pastor reading this. I want to say something to every leader and every parent and every intercessor who already knows in your bones that something serious is happening to the young people around you, and you have been praying and wondering if it matters. It matters. What you do in the place of prayer is not a preparatory activity before the real work begins. It is the real work. The angels do not move without it. The atmosphere does not shift without it. The teenager on the bridge does not step back without it. Your prayers, however quiet, however unwitnessed, however uncertain you feel when you are praying them, are becoming something in the spirit realm that you do not have category for yet. They are becoming warriors. They are becoming light in a darkness that is trying to swallow a generation whole. The enemy knows what this generation carries. The question is whether the church will rise to the seriousness of this moment before it is too late for those who are still making up their minds about whether life is worth living and whether God is real and whether there is any reason to keep going. I am telling you there is. I am telling you that what I saw from that elevated place was not a generation destroyed. It was a generation contested. There is a difference. Destroyed means finished. Contested means the outcome is not yet decided, and the prayers of the saints are the deciding factor. Since that night, I have restructured my entire prayer life. My church now hosts a weekly intercession gathering specifically for young people, teenagers by name, college students by name, specific young people in our city who do not yet know the Lord. We have started a prayer chain that runs through the night on Fridays. Some of the people who pray at 3 in the morning are themselves in their 20s. And when they pray, the presence of God in the room is unlike anything I experienced in 11 years of comfortable ministry. Something is shifting. I can feel it the way you feel a weather change before the clouds arrive. There is a rumbling in the spirit of something enormous that has not yet broken through fully, but is on its way. And I believe with everything in me that the revivals we will witness in the coming years will be carried by the very generation the enemy tried hardest to destroy. He will not succeed, not because the church is strong enough on its own, but because the one standing beside me that night in that luminous realm between the seen and the unseen is strong enough, and he told me himself what is coming, and he was not afraid. Neither am I, not anymore. If you are an intercessor, do not stop. If you are a pastor who has allowed the culture of your church to drift away from deep prayer, bring it back. If you are a young person reading this who has been battling hopelessness or addiction, or the quiet voice that tells you your life does not matter, I want you to know that I saw you from another realm, and there are people praying for you whose names you will not know until heaven. And the angels are moving on your behalf, and the enemy is not targeting you because you are nothing. He is targeting you because you are something he is afraid of. Rise. The world needs what is inside of you, and the God who made you is not finished yet. Thank you for listening. If this testimony blessed you, then you need to share it. Make sure it reaches as many who needs to listen to this today. Also give this video a like so that YouTube can push it to more people who might want to listen to this today. If you have done that, may God bless you. See you on the next one.